The girl lay in the burned grass, blood soaking into the dirt faster than shade could ever reach her. The sun stood straight overhead, cruel and white, pressing down on her body like a weight she couldn't push away. Her dress was torn high at the thigh, the fabric ripped open where skin had split, red and raw in the heat. She tried to scream again, but her voice broke into air. Every breath came shallow, sharp, like her chest didn't want to rise anymore. Flies hovered low, bold in the smell of blood, and the dry grass crackled each time she shook. A wagon lay tipped on its side 20 yards away. One wheel snapped clean through. The canvas was ripped wide, as if something had grabbed it hard and torn it loose. Behind her, a horse stood frozen, reins pulled tight, sides heaving. It kept glancing toward the open prairie, ears twitching, listening for something that hadn't shown itself yet. Silas Mercer saw the girl before he saw the blood. Then he saw the wound. And then he saw the heat. Heat killed. Infection killed faster. He swung down from the saddle and dropped to one knee beside her, slow and careful, the way a man approached a wounded horse that might bolt if startled. 49 years sat heavy in his bones, earned the hard way, under too many suns just like this one. He set his hat in the dirt and scanned the horizon once. Just once. Far off, low, and thin. A ribbon of dust crawled along the line where land met sky, too narrow for a herd, too steady for the wind. Silas didn't say anything about it. Not yet. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out a small oilcloth roll, worn smooth by years of being carried just in case. Inside lay a needle, thick thread, and a bottle of clear liquor that burned the nose even before the cork came loose. The girl's eyes locked on the needle. Her hands clawed at the grass. "I can't," she whispered. Her voice shook so badly the words barely held together. "I've never had this done before." Silas rested one hand firm against her leg, just above the wound, grounding her. He kept his voice low, steady, the way men did when panic would only make things worse. "It's a stitch," he said, "not a miracle." She swallowed hard, tears spilling free now. Then the truth came out raw and unguarded, ripped from her chest by fear and pain. "It hurts. This is my first time." Silas paused. Not because of the blood, not because of the wound, because of the way she said it, like the world had already taken enough from her. He met her eyes. "I know," he said. "It'll be quick," before he poured the liquor. He tore a strip clean from his own shirt and pressed it to her leg, not gently. Gently got people killed out here. She cried out once when the liquor hit, her back arching off the ground before she forced herself still. Silas waited until her breathing slowed, counting each rise and fall. He threaded the needle with practiced ease, hands steady, jaw tight. As he worked, the wind shifted, the horse snorted and stamped. Silas glanced up again. The dust on the horizon was closer now. He finished the last stitch, tied it clean, and wrapped the wound tight with the torn cloth from his shirt. Blood slowed, not stopped, but slowed enough to matter. Only then did he notice the way she clutched a small canvas bag to her chest. Not loosely, not by accident. He eased her hand aside just enough to see inside, a sealed envelope. Wax pressed hard, marked with a symbol he didn't recognize. That was when Silas understood. This wasn't a fall. This wasn't bad luck. Someone had chased her hard enough to break a wagon, hard enough to leave her bleeding under a sun that showed no mercy. Silas stood and looked toward the prairie again. The dust had grown thicker, closer. Helping her meant more than a stitch. If the sheriff or the wrong man saw him patching up someone being hunted, the trouble would stick to him whether he wanted it or not. Silas had walked away from trouble once before. Buried it. Left it behind with a badge he no longer wore. He looked down at the girl, young, scared, holding on to that envelope like it was the last solid thing she had left in the world. A sound carried on the wind then, faint but real. Hooves, not his horse. Before we go any further, one thing should be clear. This story is drawn from old frontier accounts and retold with care, shaped to carry meaning, hard lessons, and the kind of truth that lasts longer than names and dates. The images you see are created to help you feel the heat, the fear, and the weight of each choice made out here. And if this kind of tale isn't for you, It's all right to step away and take care of yourself. But if it holds you, if it makes you listen closer, leave a comment and let me know, because there are more stories like this waiting to be told. Silas tightened the bandage one last time. The girl hissed, but didn't pull away. He leaned close and spoke low. "Can you stand?" She nodded, not strong, but willing. The dust behind them thickened. The hooves sounded closer now. Silas reached for his reins and made his choice. If saving one frightened girl meant reopening a past he buried for good, would he ride away and let the prairie finish her off? Or would he turn and face whatever was coming, knowing there was no clean way out once he did? Silas didn't wait for the dust to get closer. Waiting was how men got surrounded. He swung up first, then reached down and hauled the girl onto the saddle behind him. Careful of her leg, but not gentle enough to waste time. She gasped when her weight shifted, fingers digging into his coat. But she stayed upright. "That way," she whispered, pointing with her chin toward a low stretch of ground where the grass dipped. Silas nodded. She knew how to read land. That mattered. They rode hard, not straight, cutting across the prairie at an angle that kept the sun in their eyes and the dust behind them guessing. The hooves behind them grew louder, then faded, then came back again. Like whoever followed wasn't sure which way they'd gone. Silas pushed the horse until its breath came ragged. Not to outrun, just to confuse. They dropped into a shallow cut in the land where the grass grew taller and the ground stayed cooler. Silas slowed, slid down, and helped the girl off the saddle. "Sit," he said. She did, leaning back against a clump of weeds, face pale, jaw tight. The bandage had already darkened, but it held. Silas crouched low and listened. Nothing but wind. For now. "Name," he said, not looking at her. "Clara," she answered. It came quick, like she'd practiced saying it. Silas nodded once. "Silas." He didn't offer more. Out here, names came in pieces. They rested only long enough for the horse to calm. Then Silas swung back into the saddle and led them toward Dodge City. Keeping to ground that broke line of sight. Clara watched everything. The way he chose paths, the way he slowed near rises, the way he scanned behind them without turning his head. "You've done this before," she said. Silas gave a short breath that might have been a laugh once, long time ago. The town came into view late in the afternoon, heat still heavy, dust hanging low over the roofs like smoke that never cleared. Dodge City looked the same as it always did, busy, hard, unforgiving. Silas took them in the back way, past the stock pens and toward a boarding house he knew charged cash and asked no questions. He helped Clara down again, slower this time, and knocked once before pushing the door open. Inside, it smelled like boiled beans and old wood. A woman behind the counter glanced up, saw the blood, and said nothing. "Room," Silas said, laying coins down. The woman slid a key across without counting. Silas got Clara settled on the bed, then stepped outside to fetch water and bandages. When he came back, he found her sitting up straighter than he expected, the small canvas bag tucked tight against her side. "You can let go," he said. She shook her head. "Not yet." Silas didn't argue. He changed the bandage, clean and quick, then poured water and set it by the bed. "Doctor's 50 miles, he said. "This will have to do." Clara nodded, then hesitated. "They were watching the Boneyard Road," she said. Silas paused. "Who?" "The men who chased me." He looked at her then. Not hard, not kind, just straight. "They'll be asking questions," he said, "and I don't like the answers they get around here." She swallowed. "I know." Silas reached for his hat. "I need supplies," he said, "and you need to stay put." She grabbed his sleeve. "Don't leave me." Silas held still for a second, then he eased her hand off his arm. "I'm not going far," he said, "and I don't run from trouble anymore. Outside." Dodge City moved like it always did. Men talking too loud, horses stamping, a piano banging somewhere off-key. Silas felt eyes on him as he crossed the street. He didn't look back. At the dry goods store, he bought more thread, clean cloth, and salt. At the apothecary, he got salve and paid extra to keep his name off the book. On his way back, he passed the sheriff's office. The door stood open. voices inside. Silas didn't slow. When he returned to the boarding house, the woman behind the counter lifted her chin toward the back room. She hasn't moved, she said. Silas nodded and went in. Clara sat where he'd left her, but the canvas bag lay open now. He saw the envelope at once, wax seal intact, mark pressed deep. "You shouldn't," he said. "I needed to know if you saw it," she replied. Silas exhaled through his nose. He'd seen seals like that before. Not often. Never good. "What's in it?" he asked. "Enough to make men like them chase me across open land," she said. Silas leaned against the wall. "Then staying in Dodge City isn't smart, I know," she said again. They sat in silence for a moment. Then footsteps sounded outside the door, not hurried, not heavy, measured. Silas straightened. His hand drifted close to his belt without touching it. A knock came, once, slow. Silas stepped in front of the bed. "Who's there?" he asked. A familiar voice answered from the hall. Friendly, too friendly. "Just checking on a wagon that came in tipped over," the voice said. "Sheriff likes to keep things tidy." Silas met Clara's eyes. She shook her head once. Silas took a breath, the kind that meant a line had just been crossed, before he opened that door. "Let me ask you something. If you were in his place, with trouble knocking and no clean answer in sight, would you play it safe and step aside, or would you stay right where you are and see what it costs? If this story's holding you so far, go ahead and subscribe so you don't lose it later. Pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee, settle in, and tell me in the comments what time it is, where you're listening from, and where in the world you are right now." Silas didn't answer the knock right away. Silence was sometimes the only way to make a man on the other side show his hand. The hallway stayed quiet, too quiet. He felt Clara's breath hitch behind him, not loud. Controlled, like she'd learned to stay still when danger came close. Silas took one slow step forward and opened the door just enough to see the man outside. It was Deputy Hale. Clean shirt, clean boots, hat tipped just right. The kind of man who smiled even when nothing was funny. "Evening." "Silas," Hale said, voice easy. "Sheriff heard about a wagon turned over west of town." Silas nodded once. "Happens." Hale leaned slightly, trying to see past him. "Anyone hurt?" "Not that I saw." Hale smiled wider, a little too wide. "That's good," he said. "Hot day to be bleeding out there?" Silas held his ground. He could smell whiskey on Hale's breath, fresh, behind him. Claire shifted on the bed, just enough. Hale's eyes flicked past Silas and landed on her. They lingered a second too long. "Well," Hale said, straightening, "Sheriff likes to keep things orderly. Wouldn't want folks getting the wrong idea." Silas nodded again. "I'll remember that." Hale stepped back. "Good." He tipped his hat and walked away down the hall, boots soft against the floorboards. Silas closed the door and set the bolt. Then he stood there a moment longer, listening. Only when the sound of boots faded did he turn around. Clara let out a breath she'd been holding since the knock. "He knew," she said. "He suspects." Silas replied, "That's worse sometimes." He crossed the room and checked the window. The street outside looked the same as always. Men talking, a horse tied to the rail. Nothing that screamed trouble, which meant trouble was thinking. Silas sat on the edge of the chair and rubbed his hands together. He didn't like Dodge City when it smiled too much. "Tell me now," he said. "Everything." Clara hesitated. Then she reached for the canvas bag and pulled the envelope free. "I worked for a land office," she said. "Copying deeds. Recording transfers." Silas nodded. "Paper moved more land than guns ever did." "I started noticing the same names," she went on. "Same marks, same debts erased." She swallowed. "People signed away land they never meant to sell." Silas leaned back. "Crow." Clara looked up sharp. "You know him." "Know of him," Silas said, "and I know what happens to folks who get in his way." She held the envelope out to him. "I copied it before they could burn it." Silas didn't take it yet. "Who else knows you have this?" She shook her head. "No one I trust." Silas finally took the envelope. The wax seal was pressed deep, deliberate, a man confident no one would challenge it. "That deputy," Clara said quietly. He wasn't asking. No, Silas replied. He was counting. Outside, the sound of laughter drifted up from the street. Someone playing card, someone winning. Silas stood and slipped the envelope inside his coat. "We won't stay the night," he said. Clara looked at her leg. "I can't run." "You don't have to," Silas said. "You just have to ride." He packed fast, efficient, like a man who'd done this more than once in his life. When they stepped outside, the sun was low and red, turning the dust into fire. Silas led the horse instead of mounting, keeping to the edge of the street where shadows clung. They passed the sheriff's office again. The door was closed now. That worried Silas more than if it had been open. They reached the edge of town without incident, but the quiet followed them like a hand on the back of the neck. Once clear, Silas mounted and pulled Clara up behind him. She held tight, jaw set, eyes forward. They rode south, not toward the open trail, but toward ground that dipped and twisted, land that hid more than it showed. The first stars came out, then the sound of hooves carried behind them. Not close, not far, just enough to be heard. Silas didn't push the horse yet. Not until he knew how many followed. They crossed a shallow creek and climbed the far bank. Silas slowed and listened. Hooves splashed behind them. More than one. "They didn't wait," Claire said. "No," Silas replied. "They never do." He turned the horse toward a stand of cottonwoods where the ground turned soft and tracks blurred. They slipped into the trees and dismounted. Silas tied the horse low and pulled Clara beside him. They crouched and waited. Men rode past moments later. 3 of them. Deputy Hale among them. He reined in and looked toward the trees for a long second. Silas thought they were seen. Then Hale spat into the dirt and kicked his horse forward. Silas waited until the sound faded before moving again. "We can't outrun them all night," Claire said. "No," Silas agreed. "So we won't." He looked at her leg. "Still bleeding slow. I'm still holding. There's a place," he said. "Army post. Fort Dodge," Claire frowned. "Soldiers, men who don't answer to crow." Silas said. They mounted again and rode under the stars. Slower now. Steadier. Behind them, somewhere in the dark, men were deciding how far they were willing to go. And that was the part Silas didn't like. Because when powerful men started choosing, someone always paid for it. As Fort Dodge lights flickered faint on the horizon, Silas felt the old weight settle back into his chest. He hadn't planned on standing against anyone ever again. But plans didn't mean much once the chase began. And the men behind them weren't riding just to ask questions anymore. They were riding to collect. The lights of Fort Dodge looked closer than they really were. They always did at night. Silas knew better than to trust the distance when the dark played tricks on the eyes. Men died thinking they were almost safe. The horse slowed on its own, chest heaving, sweat darkening its coat. Silas didn't push it. A blown horse was worse than a slow one. Clara leaned against him, breathing shallow, one hand gripping his coat. The other pressed against her bandaged leg. She hadn't complained. That worried him. They rode along a shallow rise where the ground hardened and tracks showed clear. Silas guided them off it fast, cutting into broken land where wagon wheels avoided and horses hated. Behind them, the sound of hooves came and went, closer, then farther. Whoever followed wasn't rushing. They were patient. Silas didn't like patient men. They reached a stretch of low scrub and dismounted again. Silas loosened the saddle, letting the horse breathe, and then led it by hand through brush thick enough to tear cloth and confuse tracks. Clara hissed once when her foot touched the ground. Silas caught her elbow. "You're holding," he said. "So are they," she replied. He almost smiled at that. Almost. They moved slow, quiet, stopping often. Once, Silas knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. "Hooves, not close, but steady. They're letting us think we're ahead," Clara whispered. Silas nodded. "That means they think time's on their side." They reached a dry wash and followed it 100 yards before cutting out. Silas bent low and rubbed dirt over the horse's hooves, then over his own boot. He looked at Clara. She did the same without being told. That earned her a second look. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "Watching men who didn't want to be found," she said. Silas didn't ask more. Everyone learned something for a reason. They pushed on until the land flattened and the air smelled faintly of smoke and iron. Fort Dodge. The army post sat low and wide, lights steady, quiet in a way only soldiers managed. No laughter, no music, just order. Silas felt the tension in his shoulders ease by a hair. Not safe, but safer. They approached slow, hands visible. A sentry called out once, voice sharp, alert. Silas answered, name clear, business simple. A wounded woman, men following. The gate opened enough to let them through. Inside, Clara sagged the moment her feet hit the packed earth. Silas caught her before she went down. A corporal took one look at the blood and waved them toward the infirmary. The army doctor was young, too young for the lines already cutting his face. He worked fast, asked few questions, and didn't waste words on comfort. When he finished, he stepped back and wiped his hands. "She's lucky," he said. "Another hour in that heat, and we'd be talking different." Clara closed her eyes, not asleep, just letting the worst of it pass. Silas waited outside, leaning against the wall, hat low. Soldiers passed him without comment. No one here cared who he was. That was a relief. A man approached from the far side of the yard, older, broader, walked like he expected to be obeyed. Marshal. Silas straightened. The marshal stopped a few feet away and looked him over. "You bring trouble with you," he said. Silas shrugged. "Seems to find me." The marshal nodded toward the infirmary. "She going to live?" "Yes." "Good," the marshal said, "because now she'll have to explain herself." Silas met his eyes. "She's got papers." The marshal raised a brow. "Everyone's got papers. These get men chased?" Silas replied. That earned a pause. "Come inside," the marshal said. They sat at a rough table, lantern between them. Silas laid the envelope down, but didn't let go. The marshal didn't reach for it. "Not yet. I don't like Dodge City," the marshal said. "Too many hands on the scales." Silas exhaled slow. "You're not wrong." The marshal leaned back. "If what's in there is real, it doesn't end clean." Silas nodded. "I didn't expect it to." Before anything more could be said, a shout rose from the gate, then another. Boots ran. The marshal stood. Silas followed. They reached the yard just as a soldier jogged up. Breath sharp. "Riders," he said. "Just outside the perimeter." Silas felt his jaw tighten. The marshal looked at him. "You didn't lose them?" "No," Silas said. "I slowed them." The marshal glanced toward the dark beyond the fence. Men on horseback lingered there. Shapes against the night. Waiting. "That's bold," the marshal muttered. "It's desperate." Silas corrected. The marshal turned back to him. "If they step 1 foot inside, it's my problem," he said. "But outside that fence, it's still yours." Silas nodded. "Fair enough." Clara appeared at the infirmary door, supported by the doctor. She looked pale but steady. Her eyes found Silas, then the men beyond the fence. "They didn't come for nothing," she said. Silas met her gaze. "They won't leave empty-handed." The marshal studied both of them, then sighed. "This isn't over tonight," he said. "No." Silas agreed. "It's just deciding how ugly it gets." Beyond the fence, one rider shifted forward. Another followed, not attacking, not leaving, waiting, and that was when Silas understood something important. They weren't here for the envelope anymore. They were here to see who would blink first. And in a standoff like that, someone always did. The riders stayed where they were, just outside the fence, like shadows that had decided to grow teeth. They didn't shout. They didn't move closer. They simply waited. Silas had seen that kind of waiting before. It wasn't courage. It was calculation. Inside the post, soldiers shifted positions without being told. Not fast. Not loud. Just enough to remind anyone watching that the fence mattered. The marshal rubbed his jaw and looked from the riders back to Silas. "They won't cross," he said. "Not tonight." Silas nodded. "They don't have to." Clara sat on a bench near the infirmary door, a blanket around her shoulders, eyes never leaving the dark shapes beyond the fence. She looked smaller now that the adrenaline had burned off. Younger, too. Silas walked over and crouched in front of her. "How's the leg?" "It hurts," she said, "but it's not bleeding. That's good enough for now." She studied his face for a second. "They won't stop," she said. "No," Silas replied. "They'll change angles." The marshal joined them, lowering his voice. "I can keep you here till morning," he said. "After that, things get complicated." Silas knew what he meant. Soldiers rotated. Orders changed. Paperwork took over where judgment left off. "Morning's enough," Silas said. The marshal looked at him. "You planning to ride out?" "Yeah." "With her?" "Yes." The marshal sighed. "You always were stubborn." Silas gave a thin smile, kept me breathing. Night deepened. The riders shifted again. One of them dismounting to stretch, another lighting a cigarette that flared and died. They weren't going anywhere. Silas sat on the steps and waited. Waiting was easier when you knew what you were waiting for. Clara broke the silence after a while. "Why are you helping me?" Silas didn't answer right away. The truth had more than one edge. "'Cause you didn't deserve to bleed out in the grass," he said finally. "That's not all of it," she replied. Silas looked at her then. "You're right," he said. "But it's enough for tonight." Toward dawn, the riders pulled back a little. Not gone, just farther out. Enough to sleep in turns, enough to keep pressure without showing their hand. The marshal returned with coffee that tasted like regret and heat. He handed Silas a cup. "I'll say this once," the marshal said. "If what's in that envelope touches federal land or army contracts, it gets bigger than all of us." Silas nodded. "That's why we're riding." Clara stood with help and tested her weight. She winced, but stayed upright. "I can do this," she said. Silas handed her a canteen. "Drink slow." They saddled just before first light. Soldiers watched without comment. The riders beyond the fence watched too. Silas mounted first, then helped Clara up behind him. She settled, careful, steady. The marshal walked them to the gate. He stopped Silas there. "You bring that back clean," he said, "or don't bring it back at all." Silas met his eyes. "No promises." The gate opened. The prairie spread out ahead, wide and unforgiving. They rode south at a measured pace, not trying to disappear, just refusing to be hurried. Behind them, the riders moved again. Not all of them, just enough. Clara leaned close. "They're splitting up." Silas nodded. "Good eye." They crossed hard ground where tracks showed clear. Silas led them off at fast, angling toward low country again. The sun climbed, heat returning with it. The horses' breathing stayed even. Silas kept it that way. Around mid-morning, they stopped near a stand of scrub to rest and check the bandage. It held, barely. Silas tightened it and looked at Clara. "You ride better than you should." She shrugged. "I learned quick." He studied her a second longer. "From who?" She hesitated. "Men who didn't teach kindly." Silas nodded once. That told him enough. They moved again, cutting toward a stretch of land where the Santa Fe Trail bent away. More traffic there, more eyes. The riders behind them kept distance. Too much distance. Silas didn't like that either. Near noon, they reached a shallow rise and stopped. Silas slid down and shaded his eyes. Ahead, dust rose from the trail. Wagons, people. Behind them, dust rose too. Clara saw it at the same time. "They're boxing us." "Yes," Silas said. He weighed the ground, the horse, the heat. If they ran, they'd be run down. If they hid, they'd be found. Silas made a decision that tasted old. "We turn," he said. "Back," Clara asked. "Not back," Silas replied. Sideways, they cut off the trail and rode toward broken land that offered cover but no easy escape. Behind them, the riders adjusted at once. Too fast, too smooth. Silas felt the old calm settle in. The kind that came before trouble broke wide open. As they disappeared into the rough ground, Silas knew one thing for sure. By nightfall, someone was going to make a mistake, and whoever made it first was going to pay for it. The broken land rose up fast, rough and uneven. The kind of ground that punished horses and tested men. Silas guided them in without slowing too much, knowing that hesitation was just another word for being caught. The horse picked its way across rock and scrub, breath steady but working. Clara stayed quiet behind him, arms locked around his waist, her weight balanced better than most men he'd ridden with. Behind them, the riders followed. Not charging, not careless. They split wider now, one group angling left, another right. Like dogs working a scent they trusted. Silas felt the corners closing. This land could hide them for a while, but it would also trap them if he guessed wrong. They dropped into a narrow draw where the wind cut low and the sun couldn't reach all the way down. Silas slowed and dismounted, leading the horse the rest of the way. He tied the reins short and helped Clara down. She landed stiff but didn't cry out. He said, pointing to a slab of rock in the shade. She obeyed, teeth clenched, eyes sharp. Silas knelt and checked the bandage again. Still holding, barely. Another hour like this, he said. And we stop whether we want to or not. Clara nodded. I can give you an hour. Silas scanned the ridge line. Nothing yet. He reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope, weighing it in his hand like it might answer back. Paper did strange things to men, made them bold, made them stupid. Silas tucked it away again and stood. We're not outrunning them, he said. So we're going to slow them down. He led the horse deeper into the draw, then stopped and worked quickly. He brushed tracks and scattered stones and walked backward for a short stretch before cutting sideways through brush. Clara watched, learning. They moved on foot for a time, keeping low, letting the horse rest where it could. The air stayed still, heavy with heat and the smell of dust and sweat. Then it happened. A rock shifted under Clara's boot. Just one. It clattered down the slope, sharp and loud. Silas froze. So did she. From the ridge above, a voice carried down, close. Too close. Silas moved without thinking. He pulled Clara back into the shadow and drew his revolver, not raising it yet. Hooves appeared at the top of the draw. Then a man, not Deputy Hale. One of the others, younger, careless. He leaned forward, scanning below. Silas waited until the man stepped down far enough to commit. Then he lunged. The impact was hard and ugly. Silas drove his shoulder into the man's chest and carried him down into the dirt. The man grunted, tried to bring his gun up. Silas knocked it aside and struck him once, clean and heavy. The man went still, breathing but done. Silas dragged him into cover and stripped the belt and hat, then tied his hands fast. Clara stared at him. You didn't kill him. Silas shook his head. Dead men don't talk, he said. He searched the man quick. Money, a token, a scrap of paper with a name scrawled on it. Silas read it and felt his jaw tighten. What? Clara asked. Crow, Silas said. Her face went pale. The land man, the same. Silas replied. That name carried weight, even spoken quiet. Silas stood and listened. More voices now, shouting. They'd found the missing rider. Silas grabbed the horse and pulled Clara up again. They moved fast, not running, but not hiding either. They burst out of the draw and into open ground, the sun hitting them hard. Silas angled toward a stand of rocks that rose like broken teeth from the earth. Shots rang out behind them. Not close. Warnings. Silas didn't answer. He hated wasting bullet. They reached the rocks and slid in behind them, breathing hard. The horse trembled, sides heaving. Silas patted its neck. Easy, he murmured. Clara looked back toward the draw. They're mad now. Silas nodded. Good. Angry men rushed. Careful men waited. Silas checked his revolver, then looked at Clara. If it comes to it, he said, you stay low. She met his eyes. I won't freeze. He believed her. That worried him more than if she'd sounded scared. The riders crested the rise in a loose line, spreading, guns out now. Deputy Hale rode in the middle, calm as ever. Silas felt the old anger stir. He pushed it down. Anger got sloppy. A bullet cracked against stone near his head. Close enough to count. Silas fired once, not to hit, but to make them duck. It worked. Dust jumped. Men cursed. They traded ground that way for a while. A step, a pause, another shot. The sun climbed higher. Sweat burned Silas's eyes. He counted rounds. Too few. Clara tugged his sleeve. "Tell it," she said. He glanced at her. She nodded toward the envelope inside his coat. He understood. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded once. It took a breath and made a decision that tasted like iron. He stood just enough to be seen and shouted. "Crow wants his paper," he called. "He can come get it." The riders hesitated. Deputy Hale raised a hand. The shouting stopped. Silas felt the balance shift. This wasn't about chasing anymore. This was about owning. Hale rode forward a few steps. "Throw it out," he called. Silas didn't move. "You first," he replied. Silence stretched. "The kind that broke men?" Clara leaned close and whispered, "You just changed the game." Silas nodded. "That's the point." As Hale reached for his saddlebag, Silas felt something tighten in his chest. Because men like Crow never played fair, and whatever came next wasn't going to end with words. The silence after Silas spoke felt heavier than the heat. Even the wind seemed to slow down, like it didn't want to be blamed for what came next. Deputy Hale kept his hand near the saddlebag, eyes narrowed, measuring distance and consequence. The other riders shifted their weight, unsure if this was the moment to push or pull back. Silas stayed still behind the rocks. Stillness was a language, too. Clara watched the men spread out, saw how none of them looked directly at the envelope Silas held inside his coat. They were looking at him instead. That told her something. Hale cleared his throat. "You throw it out," he said again, calmer this time. "No one else gets hurt." Silas didn't answer. He glanced at Clara, then at the horse, then at the ground ahead. He was building a picture in his head, piece by piece. Men like Hale always wanted things clean in public. Messy happened later. Silas rose just enough to be seen again. "You want clean," he said. "Then you bring Crow here yourself." A murmur rippled through the riders. Not fear. Surprise. Hale's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works." Silas shrugged. "Works fine from where I'm standing." A shot cracked from the left. Too fast. Too eager. The bullet smacked into rock. Showering stone chips. Clara ducked hard. Silas fired back once, low and sharp. The rider who fired cursed and fell back out of sight. Everything moved after that. Men shouted. Horses reared. Shots rang out in bursts, not aimed to kill, but to push. Silas pulled Clara back deeper into cover and moved them sideways, using the rocks the way he'd learned long ago. "Never stay where they last saw you." The riders pressed forward, confident now that noise covered mistakes. That confidence would cost someone. Silas waited for it. It came when two men tried to flank wide, cutting too far from Hale's line of sight. Silas caught the movement and acted. He fired twice, fast, not at bodies. At ground. Dust jumped. Horses balked. One rider went down hard, tangled in reins. Silas moved again, always moving. Clara followed without being told. Crawling where he crawled. Staying low. Breathing through pain. She didn't scream when a stone cut her palm. She wiped the blood on her skirt and kept going. That steadiness saved them. The riders regrouped, slower now. Anger replacing patience. Hale shouted orders, trying to pull things back under control. Silas heard it in his voice. Control was slipping. Silas leaned close to Clara. "When I say go," he said, "you go straight to the wash and don't stop." "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be right behind," he said. She looked at him, searching his face. Then she nodded. Silas stood again and waved one hand. Crow sent boys to do a man's work. He called, "That about right?" That did it. Hale shouted and spurred his horse forward. The line surged. Silas fired once more and shouted, "Now." Clara ran. Silas stayed for a heartbeat. It felt like old times. The noise, the chaos, clear choices. Then a bullet tore through his hat brim, close enough to burn. Silas dropped back and ran, boots pounding, lungs burning. He slid into the wash just as another shot cracked overhead. Clara waited where he said she would, eyes wide, breathing hard. They moved together now, running bent, using the wash to hide their path. The riders followed, slower, more cautious. Silas glanced back once and saw Hale dismount, kneeling, scanning. That worried him more than the men still mounted. They reached a bend where the wash narrowed and the walls rose. Silas stopped and turned. "Give me the envelope," he said. Clara hesitated. Then she did. Silas tucked it into his boot and handed her his coat. "If they catch me," he said, "you ride." "No," she said. Silas held her gaze. "This is how you live." She swallowed, then nodded. They heard shouting closer now. Boots on dirt. Silas stepped back toward the bend. He picked up a rock and tossed it hard to the left, and then another to the right. Men shouted again, splitting instinctively. Silas used that moment to run straight ahead, drawing fire and eyes with him. Clara watched him go, heart hammering, then mounted the horse and rode the way he'd pointed. Shots cracked behind her, none close enough. Silas ran until his chest burned, then dropped flat behind a rise and stayed still. Men passed him, close enough to smell sweat and dust. He waited until the sound faded. When he stood again, the sun was lower, shadows stretching long. He brushed dirt from his clothes and started walking, not toward the riders, not toward the wash, toward a place he hadn't planned to see again. By the time he reached the edge of the broken land, night was coming on. The first stars blinked awake overhead. Silas paused and listened, far off. A horse moved at a steady pace. Claire was riding. Silas exhaled slow. Good. But the envelope weighed heavy in his boot. He could feel it with every step, and he knew something now that he hadn't before. Crow wasn't trying to scare them anymore. He was trying to decide who he wanted alive at the end of this. And that meant the next meeting wouldn't happen on open ground. The night settled in fast once the sun was gone. Out here, dark didn't arrive. It dropped. Clara rode with her head low and her eyes forward, letting the horse choose its footing where she couldn't see. Every jolt sent pain up her leg, sharp and steady, but she didn't slow. Silas had told her where to go, not a place on a map, just a line in the land. Follow the shallow creek. Keep the stars to your left. Ride until the ground smells wet again. She did exactly that. Behind her, the prairie stayed quiet. Too quiet. Clara listened for hooves the way a person listens for breathing in a dark room. You didn't need to hear it to know it might be there. She reached the low ground near the creek and slid down from the saddle, legs shaking. The horse lowered its head and drank without being told. Clara knelt and pressed her palm to the dirt, cool, damp. Silas had been right. She tightened the bandage again and leaned back against a cottonwood, letting herself breathe for the first time since she ran. Her hands trembled now that the danger felt farther away. That came later, always did. She reached inside the coat Silas had given her, fingers brushing the empty space where the envelope had been. It felt wrong not to have it there. For a moment, she hated him for taking it. Then she understood why he had. Men chased paper. They killed for paper, but they hunted people harder. Clara closed her eyes and remembered the office where she used to work, the smell of ink, the scrape of chairs, the way names repeated in ledgers that weren't supposed to match. She hadn't gone looking for trouble. Trouble had been sitting there, written in careful lines, waiting for someone to notice. She noticed. A sound snapped her back to the present. Water moving, not the creek. Closer! Clara reached for the revolver Silas had slipped into her hand before they split. It felt heavy, real. She stood slowly and listened. A man stepped out from behind the trees, then another. Not Crow's riders. These men moved different. One held a lantern low. The other kept his hands visible. Easy. The first man said, "We're not here to hurt you." Clara didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" she asked. "Friends of the creek," the man said with a tired smile. "Depends on the night." Clara took a step back. "Stay where you are." The men stopped. "You're hurt." The second one said, "Leg." Clara said nothing. The first man nodded slowly. "Name's Ellis," he said. "We run freight along the trail." Clara studied them. Their boots were worn, not polished. Their coats patched, not law, not hired guns. "Why follow me?" she asked. Ellis shrugged. Woman riding alone at night tends to draw questions. Clara tightened her grip. So does men creeping through trees. That earned a short laugh. Fair, Ellis said. Silence stretched again. Finally, Clara spoke. I don't want trouble. Ellis nodded. Neither do we. He glanced at her leg. There's a place a mile north, he said. Old line shack. Roof still holds. Clara hesitated. She thought of Silas, thought of the riders, thought of the fact that staying all alone was just another kind of gamble. She lowered the gun a fraction. Lead, she said. They walked slow, careful. Lantern kept low. The shack was exactly where Ellis said it would be. Bare, but dry. Clara sat and let the pain catch up with her. Ellis poured water and set it near her. Didn't think we'd be helping a woman chased by half of Kansas tonight, he said. Clara looked up sharp. Half? Ellis nodded. Word moves fast when money's involved. Her stomach tightened. So he spread it, she said. Ellis raised a brow. She shook her head. Never mind. Outside, a horse snorted. Clara froze. Ellis went still, then slowly smiled. That'd be your man, he said. A shape appeared in the doorway. Dusty. Tired. Silas Mercer stepped inside and leaned against the wall like his bones had finally decided they were done. You ride better than you should, he said. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. And you walk quieter than you look. Ellis cleared his throat. I'll give you 2 a minute. He stepped outside, lantern fading into the dark. Silas sank onto a crate. You hurt worse, he said. Clara nodded. But I'm still standing. He met her eyes. That's not nothing. She hesitated, then asked, Did you keep it? Silas tapped his boot. Didn't let it out of my sight. She leaned back and closed her eyes. For a moment, there was nothing but night sounds and shared breathing. Then Silas spoke again. They're not done, he said. I know, Clara replied. Silas looked toward the door. Crow won't send boys next time. Clara opened her eyes. What will he send? Silas didn't answer right away, because he knew, and because saying it out loud made it real. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and flat. He'll come himself, he said. And that was the moment Clara understood this had crossed into something that couldn't be handed off or hidden anymore. Because when men like Crow stepped out of the shadows, it meant the end was coming one way or another. The shack went quiet after Silas said it. Too quiet. Even the night sounds seemed to pull back, like they didn't want to hear what came next. Clara sat still on the crate, blanket around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the dirt floor. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Men like Crow didn't send others forever. They showed up when things stopped going their way. Silas leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Not to rest, to remember. He remembered Crow from years ago. Thinner, then, louder, always standing a step behind someone else until he learned how to step forward without asking. He remembered the look in his eyes the first time blood had settled something for him. That look didn't fade with age. It sharpened. Clara broke the silence. What happens when he comes? Silas opened his eyes. Then we stop running, he said. She nodded slowly. That doesn't sound like a plan. It's the end of one. Silas replied, outside. Ellis moved around the shack, careful not to make noise. A good habit, a habit learned the hard way. Silas stood and stretched his shoulders, joints cracking like dry wood. He crossed the room and checked the door, then the small window. No lights, he said. No fire. Claire watched him work. You've done this before? Silas didn't answer. He stepped outside and spoke low with Ellis, just enough for Claire to catch pieces. Riders seen near the creek. 2 groups, one heading south. When Silas came back in, his face was set. They're fanning out, he said. Looking for signs, we stopped. Clara tightened the blanket around herself. They'll find this place. Yes, Silas said, but not yet. He reached down and pulled the envelope from his boot, setting it on the crate between them. It looked smaller now, like it had shrunk under the weight it carried. "This is what they want," he said. Clara nodded. "And what you're carrying for me?" Silas shook his head. "I'm carrying it because if I don't, you won't get a chance to decide what it's worth." She studied him for a long second. "You could leave," she said. Silas met her eyes. Could have back at the grass. She didn't argue. The night stretched on. Ellis brought water and a little food. No one ate much. Silas kept his revolver close but untouched. He wasn't waiting for a fight. He was waiting for a moment. Toward early morning, Clara shifted and hissed as her leg protested. Silas knelt and checked the bandage again. Still holding. Still angry. "You're going to limp for a while," he said. "I can live with that," she replied. He looked at her then. Really looked. Not a girl anymore. Not just someone running. "You understand what this brings," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "And I understand what happens if I stop." Silas nodded once. That answer mattered. Ellis stepped inside, face tight. "Riders," he said. "Close." Silas stood. "How many?" "Hard to tell," Ellis replied. "But one of them isn't hiding." Silas felt his chest tighten. That told him enough. He handed the envelope back to Clara. "For now," he said. She frowned. "You said?" "I know what I said," Silas replied. "But I also know Crow." He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Stay here," he said. "No matter what you hear," she grabbed his wrist. "You don't get to do this alone." Silas looked down at her hand. "Firm? Steady?" "I don't plan to," he said. "But someone has to make the first mistake." He stepped outside. The prairie was pale with early light. Shadows long and thin, figures moved at the edge of sight. Slow, deliberate. One man rode forward alone. He didn't rush, didn't hide. He wore a clean hat and a dark coat, even in the heat. A man who liked to look like he belonged wherever he stood. Luther Crow. Silas felt something old stir in his gut. Not fear. Memory. Crow stopped a short distance away and smiled. Not friendly, not cruel, measured. "Morning," Crow called. Silas didn't answer. Crow dismounted, boots hitting the dirt, soft. He glanced at the shack and then back at Silas. "You've been busy," Crow said. Silas folded his arms. "So have you." Crow chuckled. "Running a man my size is hard work." Silas said nothing. Crow took a few steps closer, stopping just short of comfortable. "You always did have a habit of picking the wrong side," he said. Silas met his gaze. "I picked the only one I could live with." Crow's smile thinned. "That why you left the badge? That landed?" Crow knew exactly where to press. Silas kept his voice even. "You didn't ride all this way to talk about me." Crow nodded. "True." His eyes flicked toward the shack. "You've got something that belongs to me." Silas shrugged. "Paper's funny that way." Crow's jaw tightened for the first time. "That paper decides who eats and who doesn't." Silas leaned forward a fraction. "Then maybe you should have been more careful with it." For a moment, neither man spoke. The air between them felt thin, stretched. Crow exhaled, slow. "You think the army will save you," he said. Silas shook his head. "No," he said. "I think daylight will." Crow laughed then, a short sound, sharp. "You haven't changed," he said. "And that's your problem." He turned and walked back toward his horse. But he didn't mount. Instead, he looked back over his shoulder. "You've got till sundown," he said. "After that, I stop asking." Then he swung up and rode away, his men falling in behind him. Silas stood there long after they disappeared into the light. He felt the weight of the choice settle in his bones. Sundown wasn't far, and when it came, there would be no more space left to hide in. Because Crow hadn't come to bargain, he had come to measure how much blood this would take. Crow rode off without looking back, like a man certain the land itself would finish what he started. Dust settled slowly after him, hanging in the air long enough to remind Silas that time was no longer something they owned. Silas stood where he was for a while, listening, not for hooves, for himself. When he finally turned back toward the shack, the day had already begun to tilt. Sundown wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Clara watched him come in. reading his face before he said a word. He gave us time, she said. He gave himself room, Silas replied. Ellis hovered near the doorway, nervous now, the easy confidence gone. You staying? He asked. Silas nodded. For now. Ellis scratched his neck. Then I'll move my people out. Silas looked at him. They'll come anyway. Ellis swallowed. Then I won't be here when they do. Silas didn't blame him. Not everyone signed up for a stand. Once Ellis was gone, and the shack felt smaller, not empty, focused. Silas set to work. He checked the ground around the shack, marked lines only he would notice, spots where a boot would slide or a rock would turn. He dragged brush to hide their tracks, then left one trail open on purpose. Clara watched from the doorway, saying nothing. Come here, Silas said. She did, slow but steady. He handed her the envelope again. This stays with you now, he said. Her brow creased. You said? I said what made sense then, Silas replied. This is different. She held the envelope like it might burn. And if they take it, they won't, Silas said. She studied him. You sound sure. Silas looked past her at the land. I'm done guessing. They spent the afternoon quiet, conserving strength, drinking water, eating little. Silas cleaned his revolver slow, methodical, the way he used to clean tack when the work mattered more than the result. Clara rewrapped her leg, tighter this time, jaw set. She didn't ask for help. That told Silas she was done being carried by the day. As the sun slid lower, the heat eased just enough to remind them how much it had taken. Shadows stretched long across the ground, making everything look farther away than it was. Silas stepped outside and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. That worried him more than dust ever had. Clara joined him. Careful. They're waiting, she said. Yes, Silas replied, and so are we. He led her to a shallow dip behind the shack where the ground dropped just enough to hide a body. If things go wrong, he said, you go here. And you, she asked. Silas didn't answer. That was answer enough. The first rider appeared an hour before sundown, then another, then more. They didn't rush. They formed a loose half circle, keeping distance, letting the light do the work. Crow rode last. He stopped well out of range and dismounted, arms relaxed, hat low. A man arriving at his own table, Silas stepped out where he could be seen, hands empty. Clara stayed hidden, heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. Crow smiled. You came to your senses, he said. Silas shook his head. No, he replied. I came to the end of them. Crow chuckled. That's the same thing in my book. The men behind Crow shifted, guns ready but not raised. They didn't need to be. Not yet. Crow glanced at the shack. She's still breathing. Silas said nothing. Crow sighed. Such a waste, he said. All this for paper. Silas took a step forward. All this 'cause you don't know when to stop. Crow's smile faded a touch. You always did think you were teaching lessons, he said. The sun dipped lower, edging toward the hills, time thinning. Silas felt the weight of years settle on him. Not regret, responsibility. He raised his voice just enough. The envelope goes to the army, he said. You know that. Crow laughed. Army's got no appetite for paperwork that starts wars, Silas nodded. That's why I'm feeding it to them slow. Crow's eyes flicked, quick and sharp. Where? Silas didn't answer. The light shifted again. Gold turning red. Crow exhaled through his nose. You think you're buying her a future, he said. All you're doing is borrowing time. Biles met his gaze. That's all anyone ever gets. For a long moment, no one moved. The prairie held its breath. Then Crow lifted one hand. Men tensed. Silas felt the moment snap into focus. A shot rang out. Not from him. Not from Crow. From the far right. One of Crow's men jerked and fell, leg screaming. Another shot followed. Close, sharp. Chaos broke loose. Men shouted. Horses reared. Silas moved at once, dropping, rolling, firing twice to keep heads down. Dust exploded around him. Clara ran for the dip Silas had shown her, heart hammering, teeth clenched against pain. She slid down and pressed flat, clutching the envelope to her chest. Gunfire cracked across the land, not a battle, but a break, a mistake someone had made too early. Silas crawled, using noise and smoke, moving where no one expected. He felt a sting on his arm, but didn't look. Crow shouted orders, voice tight now, control slipping. Silas saw an opening and took it, firing low, forcing men back instead of down. The sun touched the hills, light bled out of the sky. Silas reached the edge of the dip and slid in beside Clara, breathing hard. She looked at him, eyes wide. "You're hit," she whispered. "Later," he said. They lay there, shot slowed, then stopped. Crow's voice carried again, colder now. "Enough," he called. Silence followed. Crow stepped forward into the fading light, one man between two shadows. "This doesn't end tonight," he said. Silas pushed himself up on one elbow. "And you better choose your next move carefully," he replied. Crow smiled thin. "Oh, I will." He turned and walked away, his men gathering around him like the day itself had decided to leave with them. Night settled in hard and fast. Silas lay back, chest heaving, staring at the first stars. Clara crawled closer. "Is it over?" she asked. Silas shook his head. "No," he said. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Because now Crow knew something he hadn't before. Silas wasn't running anymore, and the next move wouldn't be about chasing. Night settled over the land like a heavy blanket no one could shake off, the kind that pressed down on your chest and reminded you sleep was a privilege, not a right. Silas lay still in the dip for a long time after Crow and his men disappeared, not because he was tired, because moving too soon meant making noise, and noise still belonged to other people. Clara stayed close, breathing shallow, listening the way Silas had taught her without ever saying the words. She could feel his pulse through the dirt when she rested her hand near his arm. Steady. That helped. When Silas finally pushed himself up, the pain in his arm flared hot and sharp. He hissed once and stopped, waiting for it to settle. "It's not bad," he said quietly. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had already seen the blood. They moved slow back to the shack, using the dark the same way they had used daylight earlier, as cover, as warning. Inside. Silas sat and let Clara clean the wound. It wasn't deep, but it wasn't nothing. "You should have let me do more," she said. Silas shook his head. Didn't have the time. She wrapped the bandage tighter than he would have. He let her. Outside, the night kept quiet. Too quiet. That worried Silas more than gunfire ever had. Once the work was done, they sat on opposite sides of the small room, the envelope between them like a third person who hadn't spoken yet. Clara broke the silence first. "You knew Crow before," she said. Silas leaned back against the wall. "Before he learned how to wear clean coats," he replied. She waited. He knew she would. "I was law once," Silas said. "Not good law, not bad law, just what passed for it." Clara stayed quiet, eyes on him. "There was a fight," he continued. "Drunk men, loud men. One of them didn't walk away." She swallowed. "Crow's brother," Silas said. The words settled heavy between them. "I didn't mean to kill him," Silas added. "But I didn't mean to miss either." Clara nodded slowly. "So that's why he hates you." Silas shook his head. "That's why he understands me." That landed harder, outside. Something moved in the brush. Both of them froze. A moment passed. Meh. Then another. Nothing came of it. Silas exhaled. "They won't push tonight," he said. "Crow never wastes men when waiting hurts more." Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "So what happens now?" Silas looked at the envelope. "Now," he said, "we stop pretending this ends clean." He stood and paced once, slow, careful of his arm. "Crow won't chase any more," he said. "He'll arrange." Clara frowned. "Arrange what?" Silas met her eyes. "A trade," he said. "Not for the paper, for people." That chilled her more than the night air. Silas stopped pacing. "That's why we leave before morning," he said. "Where?" Clara asked. Silas hesitated. "Back toward Dodge City." Her eyes widened. "That's where he owns everything." Silas nodded. And where everyone will be watching. She understood then. Crow liked shadows. He liked quiet. He liked things that disappeared. Daylight and witnesses made him careful. They slept in shifts, not real sleep, just closing eyes and hoping nothing touched you. When dawn came, it was pale and thin, like it didn't want to be there. Silas saddled the horse and checked the land one last time. Tracks circled but didn't close. Crow was giving them room. That was never kindness. They rode out slow, not hiding, not rushing, just moving like people who belonged where they were. Clara sat straighter now, pain still there, but controlled. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly. Silas didn't answer right away. "Who?" "Every man does," he said finally. "Some just don't do it." They reached higher ground by mid-morning. From there, Silas could see smoke in the distance. A ranch, not his. He studied it longer than necessary. Clara noticed. "You know that place." Silas nodded. "I used to." They didn't ride closer. Instead, Silas turned the horse toward a stretch of road that led back toward town, toward eyes, toward trouble that had names. "Once we cross that road," he said. "There's no slipping out the side." Clara nodded. "I'm done slipping." That earned a look from him. Not surprised, respectful. As they rode, Silas felt the old weight settle fully into place. Not fear, responsibility. Crow had drawn a line now, and lines only mattered if someone stood on the wrong side of them. By late afternoon, they could see the dust of wagons. People. Business. Silas slowed the horse and looked at Clara. "From here on," he said, "you don't let go of that envelope." She nodded and tucked it inside her coat. They merged onto the road like they belonged there. No rush. No hiding. Silas knew Crow would hear about it within the hour. That was the point. As Dodge City crept closer on the horizon, Silas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not because they were safe, but because the waiting was almost done. Whatever Crow planned next would have to happen where people could see it. And that meant mistakes. Silas glanced at Clara, then back toward the town. The next move wouldn't be a chase. It would be a choice. Dodge City didn't greet them. It measured them. Silas felt it the moment they rolled in. Eyes lifting from cards, conversations slowing just enough to hear boots and hooves. People noticed a wounded woman. They noticed a man who didn't hurry. That combination always meant trouble. Silas guided the horse down the main stretch, not hugging the edge, not cutting corners. He rode like someone with business, not like someone running from it. Clara sat straight behind him, pain tucked away behind her eyes. She kept one hand on the saddle and the other pressed against her coat where the envelope rested. They stopped near the livery, not the boarding house. Too many ears there. Silas slid down and tied the horse himself. Slow, visible, a few men nodded. Others looked away too fast. Clara noticed the way the deputy across the street turned his head and then pretended not to watch. Silas helped her down and let her stand on her own. That mattered. They walked, not to hide, to be seen. The sheriff's office sat quiet, door open, chair empty. That was wrong. Silas didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, he turned toward the land office, the place Clara had learned to read trouble in ink and numbers. The door was locked. Middle of the day. That told Silas more than if it had been wide open. He leaned close to Clara. "Crow's been here," he said. She nodded. "I can feel it." They crossed the street toward the saloon, not to drink, but because it was where people talked loud enough to be heard. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and heat. A piano played something tired. Silas chose a table near the wall, back covered, front open. Clara sat across from him, careful, steady. No one bothered them. That worried Silas more than a fight would have. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, a man Silas recognized drifted close. A ranch hand. Owed money to the wrong people. "Didn't expect to see you back," the man said. Silas looked up. "Didn't plan on it." The man swallowed. "You should leave," he said. Silas tilted his head. "That advice or a warning?" The man glanced toward the door. "Both." Silas nodded. "Appreciate it." The man didn't move. "You don't understand," he said. "Crow's talking like this is personal." Silas met his eyes. It always was. The man backed away then. like he'd said too much. Clara watched the exchange, heart pounding. "He's closing doors," she said. "Yes," Silas replied, and opening one. He stood and placed coins on the table. They left without rushing. Outside, the sun pressed down again, heat wrapping the street in a dull haze. Silas turned toward the sheriff's office. At last. Inside, the sheriff sat behind his desk, hat off, face tired. He looked up and froze. "Silas," he said. "Sheriff," Silas replied. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Clara's leg, then to the envelope shape under her coat. He leaned back slow. "You shouldn't be here," the sheriff said. Silas nodded. "That makes two of us." The sheriff sighed. "I've got orders." Silas waited. "Crow wants this quiet," the sheriff continued. "No blood, no noise." Silas almost smiled. "That's new." The sheriff rubbed his face. He's offering a deal." Clara stiffened. Silas didn't look at her. "What kind?" "Paper disappears," the sheriff said. "Girl leaves town." Silas finally spoke softer. "And me," the sheriff hesitated. "You keep your head down." Silas nodded once. "There it is." The sheriff met his eyes. "You know how this ends if you say no." Silas leaned forward. "So do you." Silence settled heavy. The sheriff looked away first. "Think about it," he said. Silas stood. "We already did." They stepped back into the street. The air felt tighter now, like the town itself was holding a breath. Clara walked a little slower. Silas matched her pace without comment. They reached the edge of the street where the old cattle pen stood mostly empty. Plenty of space, plenty of witnesses. Silas stopped. "This is where he'll come," he said. Clara frowned. "Here?" "Yes," Silas replied. "He likes to own ground when he talks." She looked around. "And if he doesn't?" Silas met her eyes. "Then we make him." They waited. Time stretched. Men passed. Some slowed, some didn't. Then the sound of hooves came again. Unhurried, certain. Crow rode in from the west, alone at first, then with two men following at a respectful distance. He dismounted and smiled, same as before. "You should have taken the deal," he said. Silas shook his head. "You should have made a better one." Crow's eyes slid to Clara. "She looks tired." Clara held his gaze. "So do you." Crow laughed once. "Sharp. You don't know when to quit," he said to Silas. Silas replied calm. "I know exactly when." Crow's smile faded. "And that is—" Silas took one slow step forward. "When you stop owning everyone else's choices." The air between them went still. Crow studied him, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Then let's finish this." And in that moment, Silas realized Crow hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to force a mistake. And Dodge City was about to watch one happen. Crow didn't raise his voice when he said it. He didn't need to. Men like him never shouted at the end. They whispered and let the town do the rest. Silas felt the shift before anything else happened. Not in the air, in the people. Men who had been pretending not to watch drifted closer. Not obvious, just close enough to hear. Crow took his time, brushing dust from his sleeve like the day belonged to him. "You brought her back here," he said. "Where everyone can see." Silas nodded. That was the idea. Crow smiled thin. "Careful," he said. "You're starting to sound like a man who wants witnesses." Silas met his eyes. "I want daylight." That drew a few looks. Daylight meant records. It meant memory. Crow glanced around, taking stock, the cattle pens, the empty space, the way people lingered instead of moving on. "You think the town will side with you?" Crow said. Silas shook his head. "I think the town will remember." Crow chuckled. "Remember what?" he asked. "A tired lawman who couldn't keep his badge." That landed where it was meant to. Silas felt it anyway, then let it pass. Clara stood a step behind him, steady despite the pain pulling at her leg. She watched Crow's hands, always the hands. Crow noticed. "Smart girl," he said. "She's learned where to look." Clara didn't respond. She didn't know him that. Crow shifted his stance, angling just enough to block the sun from his eyes. "You're holding paper that doesn't belong to you," he said. Silas shrugged. "Funny thing about paper," he replied. "Belongs to whoever keeps it intact." Crow's smile tightened. That paper disappears today, he said. And this all ends easy. Silas didn't move. Crow's voice cooled. You're running out of choices. Silas nodded once. That's usually when men start telling the truth. A murmur moved through the crowd, not loud, but real. Crow heard it. He always did. He lifted a hand slightly. His men stayed back. That was important. You want truth, Crow said. Here it is. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to pull people in. I kept land moving when no one else could. He said, I kept cattle fed. Railroads paid. Silas waited. Men signed because they were scared. Crow continued. Scared men sign anything. Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Silas spoke before she could. And men who disappear, he said. They sign too. The crowd shifted again. Crow's eyes flicked, sharp now. Careful, he said. Silas took one step forward. Say their names, he said. Crow laughed softly. That's not how business works. Silas nodded. No, he said. That's how memory works. He turned slightly, enough for the people behind him to see Clara. Her bandaged leg, the strain in her posture. She didn't steal. Silas said. She copied. That word did its work. Copy meant record. Record meant trouble. Crow straightened. You think you've built a trap, he said. Silas replied calm. I think you walked into one. Crow smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're forgetting something, he said. Silas waited. I still own the law here, Crow said. Right on time. Deputy Hale stepped out from the edge of the crowd, hat low, face set. A few people noticed and stepped back. Others leaned in. Silas didn't look surprised. That mattered too. Hale cleared his throat. This is going nowhere, he said. Let's all calm down. Crow glanced at him, then back to Silas. See? He said. Silas nodded. I do. He reached into his coat slowly. Deliberate. The crowd stiffened. Silas pulled out not the envelope, but a folded sheet. Yellowed. Old. He held it up where people could see. This is a copy, Silas said. Filed years ago. Crow's eyes narrowed. It shows who owned what before your name started showing up. Silas continued. And who signed it away after? Crow laughed once. You think that matters now? Silas met his gaze. It does when there's more than one. Clara understood then. Her breath caught. Silas turned slightly toward her. Show them, he said. She stepped forward. Pain flared, and she didn't let it slow her. Clara opened her coat and held up the envelope. The wax seal caught the light. A hush fell. This isn't the only one, Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Crow's face hardened. You're making a mistake, he said. Clara met his eyes. So did you, she replied. Deputy Hale shifted. Crow, he said quietly. Crow ignored him. Give it to me, he said to Clara. She didn't move. Silas felt the line tighten. This was it. Crow exhaled slow. All right, he said. Enough talk. He nodded once. That was the signal. Hale moved, not toward Silas, toward Clara. Silas reacted without thinking. He stepped into Hale's path and shoved him back hard. The crowd gasped. Hale stumbled, grabbed for his gun, lost balance. He hit the dirt hard, breath gone. Silas stood over him, hands open, no guns. Silas said, Not yet. That moment broke something. Men shouted. Someone yelled to stop. Someone else yelled to move. Crow backed a step, eyes flashing. This isn't finished, he said. Silas nodded. I know, he replied. Crow turned and walked away. Past now. His men closing ranks around him. The crowd buzzed, voices rising, questions flying. Silas turned to Clara. You all right? He asked. She nodded, barely. He took the envelope from her and tucked it away again. Not hiding, holding. The sheriff pushed through the crowd at last, late as always. He looked from Hale on the ground to Silas standing calm. This just got bigger, the sheriff said. Silas met his eyes. That was always going to happen. As Crow disappeared down the street, Silas felt the town tip, not toward justice, toward consequence, because now everyone had seen it. The paper, the shove, the fear in Crow's eyes. And when a man like Crow started losing control in public, he never tried to get it back quietly. Silas glanced once in the direction Crow had gone. The next move wouldn't be words. It would be blood or chains, and Crow would choose which one first. Dodge City didn't calm down after Crow left. It tightened. People talked in low voices, the way they did when something ugly had shown its teeth and gone back into the dark. Men who had laughed earlier now stood in doorways, arms crossed, eyes working. Silas felt it as he walked. The town had picked a side, even if it didn't say it out loud yet. Clara stayed close, every step measured, pain kept under control by will alone. She could feel eyes on her leg, on the way she leaned just slightly too much on Silas's arm. That mattered too. They didn't make it half a block before trouble caught up. Deputy Hale came at them from the side street, face flushed, jaw tight, one hand pressed hard against his ribs where Silas had knocked the breath out of him. "This isn't over," Hale said. Silas didn't stop walking. Didn't think it was. Hale stepped into their path. "You embarrassed the wrong man," he said. Silas stopped then. Slow. Deliberate. "No," he said. "You embarrassed yourself." Hale's eyes flicked to Clara. "You think she's worth it." That did it. Silas moved before the thought finished forming. He grabbed Hale by the coat and shoved him back against the hitching post hard enough to rattle teeth. Men nearby shouted. Someone laughed nervously. Silas leaned in close. "Say one more word about her," he said, low and flat. "And you won't walk out of this street." Hale froze, not because of fear, because he knew Silas meant it. Silas let him go and stepped back, hands open. "That's the last time," Silas said. Hale straightened, eyes burning, but he didn't draw. "Not with witnesses." "Not now." That was Crow's problem now, not his. They moved on. By late afternoon, the sky had taken on that hard blue that came before heat, settled back in. Silas led Clara toward the edge of town, toward the cattle pens again. Open ground, clear sight lines. Clara noticed. "You're expecting him." "Yes," Silas said. "You sure?" "No," he replied. "But I'm done guessing." They didn't have to wait long. Dust rose again from the west, thicker this time. Not riders alone. Wagons, too. Crow wasn't hiding anymore. He rode at the front, coat off now, sleeves rolled, like a man preparing to get his hands dirty. His men followed in a wide line, guns visible, not drawn. The crowd followed too, not close, but close enough. This was no longer a private matter. Crow dismounted and tossed his reins to one of his men. He walked forward alone. "You had your moment," he said. "Now I'm taking mine." Silas stood his ground. Clara stayed just behind him. Envelope hidden. Hand steady. Crow looked around. So many eyes. He said, "Funny how brave people get when they think someone else will bleed first." Silas didn't answer. Crow stopped a few feet away. "This ends one of two ways," he said. "Easy or loud." Silas met his gaze. "That's always been your mistake," he said. "You think you choose?" Crow smiled without warmth. "I always do." He nodded once. A man on the far left raised his gun too fast. The crack came sharp and loud. Silas moved. He shoved Clara sideways and dropped as the shot went wide, smashing into wood behind them. The crowd scattered, shouting, boots pounding. Silas rolled and came up on one knee. Gun out, but not firing. Not yet. Crow shouted something Silas couldn't hear over the noise. Another shot rang out. Then another. This wasn't a gunfight yet. It was a collapse. Silas fired once, low, hitting the dirt near a man's feet and forcing him back. That pause saved 3 lives. Men hesitated. Crow didn't. He lunged forward, not with a gun, but with his hands, grabbing, trying to take. Clara screamed once as he reached for her coat. Silas hit Crow hard, shoulder to chest, driving him back into the fence. Wood cracked. The 2 men struggled, boots sliding in dust, breath hot and ragged. Crow was strong, stronger than he looked. Silas felt the years in his joints then. But he also felt something else, certainty. He drove his forearm up under Crow's chin and pinned him there. Crow clawed at his sleeve, teeth bared. You think you're better than me. Crow spat. Silas held him there, not striking, not finishing. No, he said. I think I'm done with you. A shout cut through the chaos. Drop him. The sheriff's voice. Finally, Silas didn't move. Soldiers rode in from the far street. Dust flying. Uniforms unmistakable. Fort Dodge. That changed everything. Crow saw them and went still. For the first time. Real fear crossed his face. Silas stepped back and released him. Crow stumbled, caught himself, straightened his coat with shaking hands. The sheriff moved in, flanked by soldiers. He looked at the wrecked fence, the scattered men, the shaken crowd. This is done, the sheriff said. Crow opened his mouth. A soldier stepped forward and cut him off. Sir, he said, you'll come with us. Crow laughed once, sharp, desperate. You don't have the authority, Becky, he said. The soldier didn't blink. We do now. Clara stepped forward then. Pain flaring, resolve unbroken, she held up the envelope. This says otherwise, she said. Silence fell. The sheriff took it carefully, read the seal. Read Clara's face, he looked at Crow. This time, he said quietly, you pushed too far. Crow's shoulders sagged, just a little. As soldiers closed in, Silas felt the weight finally shift. Not gone, but moving. Crow was led away, shouting, fading into curses, then into nothing. The crowd stood stunned. Clara leaned against Silas. Breath shaken. Is it over? Silas looked at the sky, the town, the men who would remember this day. No, he said softly, but it's changed. As night crept in and Dodge City slowly found its voice again, Silas knew one last thing remained. Crow might be in chains, but consequences never traveled alone, and whatever came next would decide what kind of life was left to build. Morning came softer than anyone expected, not because Dodge City had changed overnight, but because some nights carried their weight away with them. The street was quieter when Silas stepped out. Boards still scarred, fence still broken, dust still there, but Crow was gone, not vanished, not forgiven. Taken. Chains did something strange to a town. They didn't heal it. They slowed it enough for people to breathe again. Clara stood in the doorway, leaning on the frame, watching Silas take in the morning like a man who had finally reached the edge of something long overdue. Her legs still hurt. It would for a while, but pain that stayed meant you had survived it. They didn't talk much that morning. They didn't need to. Sometimes silence was the sound of things settling where they belonged. Later, when the soldiers had gone and the sheriff had retreated back into his office, people began to approach, not all at once, one by one. A rancher nodded. A shop owner said thank you without saying why. A woman pressed a cup of coffee into Clara's hands and squeezed her fingers before moving on. No speeches, no celebrations, just recognition. Silas watched it happen without stepping into it. He had learned a long time ago that attention never stayed friendly for long. Clara noticed. You don't like this part, she said quietly. Silas shook his head. I like the part where it's done. They walked to the edge of town together, slow and unhurried. The cattle pens were empty now. The place where voices had risen and choices had been forced looked smaller in daylight. Clara stopped there and looked back. I thought it would feel bigger, she said. Silas nodded. It always does at night. They stood there a moment longer, then turned away. By noon, word had spread farther than Dodge City. Paper moved faster than horses when it wanted to. The envelope was no longer just an envelope. It was a beginning. Clara sat at a small table that afternoon, copying again. Not hiding this time, not stealing time from sleep. She wrote with steady hands, careful and clear, the way truth needed to be written if it was going to last. Silas watched her from the porch, cleaning his revolver out of habit more than need. He knew he would never be law again, and he was fine with that. What mattered was that he had been a man when it counted. As the day wore on, Claire joined him, easing down beside him with a sigh. I don't know what comes next, she said. Silas looked out at the land. That's all right, he replied. Most honest lives start that way. She smiled then, not wide, real. They talked about small things, weather, horses, food that tasted better when you had earned rest. Those were the conversations that meant you were still here. When evening came, the light turned the prairie gold, and then something softer. Silas felt the old weight finally lift from his chest. Not gone, just lighter. He thought of the grass where he had first found her, the blood, the fear, the choice he had made without knowing how far it would carry him. That was how most real choices worked. Now let me step out of the story for a moment and speak to you directly. As I tell this, I cannot help but think about the times in my own life when walking away would have been easier, quieter, and far less risky. And I also know that every time I chose to stay, to stand, to finish something the right way, it cost me something and gave me something back that no shortcut ever could. Stories like this are not about the past. They are mirrors. Silas did not wake up wanting to be brave. Clara did not set out to be strong. They were pushed there by circumstance, by injustice, by the simple refusal to let something wrong pass as normal. That is the first lesson worth keeping. You do not have to be fearless to do the right thing. You just have to be tired of lying to yourself. Silas had walked away from his past once. He buried it and told himself it was over. But unfinished things have a way of finding us again. So here's a question worth asking yourself. What have you been avoiding because you told yourself it was already done? Another lesson sits with Clara. She did not win by shouting. She did not win by rushing. She won by paying attention, by noticing patterns, by copying the truth before it disappeared. In a world that rewards noise, quiet awareness is still a weapon. Ask yourself this. What are you overlooking because it is not loud enough to demand your attention? The third lesson is harder. It is about witnesses. Crow lost power the moment daylight and people entered the equation. Wrong thrives in shadows. Right needs air. You do not need to fight every battle alone. You need to choose where to fight so others can see it. So here's another question. Where in your life would things change if you stopped hiding your struggle and let the right eyes see it? Silas did not become young again. He did not reclaim a badge or rewrite his past. He simply chose not to run anymore, and that is enough. If you're listening to this and you feel tired in a way sleep does not fix, I want you to know something. That feeling often means you are closer to change than you think. Change rarely arrives with energy. It arrives with exhaustion. The moment you say, I cannot keep living this way, is often the moment a better way becomes possible. Clara left Dodge City a few days later. Not running, choosing. She left with copies, with witnesses, with a future that was not clean, but was hers. Silas watched her go and did not feel empty. He felt finished. Not ended. Finished. There's a difference. Endings close doors. Finished things free you to open new ones. Before we close this story, let me ask you one last thing. If a frightened girl had crossed your path at the worst possible moment in your life, would you have stopped, or would you have told yourself it was not your problem? And if the answer is hard to hear, that is all right. Hard answers are honest ones. If this story gave you something to think about, something to feel, something to carry into your own life, take a second to like this video so more people can find it. And if you want more stories like this, stories about choices, consequences, and quiet courage, consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss the next one. I'm grateful you spent this time with me. Pour yourself another cup of tea or coffee. Sit back for a moment and tell me in the comments what time it is, where you are listening from, and what part of the world you are in right now. Stories travel far when they are shared, and sometimes hearing the right one at the right moment is enough to remind us who we still have time to become.